Let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming this evening. I'm Dr. Christy Gardner, and it's my pleasure to serve as chair of the Department of Communication Arts, Theater, and Art at Gordon College. And this is number 7, I think, if I'm counting correctly, the 7th event of our Summer Digital Fine Arts Festival. And I'm so looking forward to our presenter this evening. As you all know, those of you who've been joining us all summer long, our theme has been the role of art in a time of crisis. And our presenter tonight has a lot to say about that. So let's get right to it. Let me turn things over to our fine arts manager and our festival coordinator, Ryan Canister, to introduce our guest.
Meredith Free graduated from Gordon College in May 2020 with a degree in art and the history of ideas in fine arts. In her work, she explores themes of paradox using various media, including watercolor, oil, and acrylic paint, graphite and charcoal, as well as stone, wood, and assemblage sculpture. Her work has been displayed in New York City, Washington, D.C., Beverly, Massachusetts, Columbus, Ohio, and Orvieto, Italy, and it can be seen at www.meredithfree.com. Now, I'll turn things over to Meredith. And Meredith, I'm wondering if, just to get us started, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit just about our theme for this whole festival, which is what is the role of art in a time of crisis. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts to just open us up on that.
Yeah. The role of art in time of crisis, I think, kind of gets down to the whole point of art, for me at least, and why I've been so, why I've chosen it as my vocation. My entire thesis is really kind of centered around art in a time of crisis, not just making art, but thinking artistically, and what that means. So hopefully, I think as I kind of talk through my thesis, I'll be able to answer that question a bit better. So my thesis has been a really personal project. So I'm going to kind of share a bit about my life. While I was at Gordon, I realized that my art was kind of vacillating between the sublime and kind of the horrific. Looking back, I've been able to see that trend. My freshman year, I was doing stone carving, and I was creating really precise and polished alabaster portraits. And then my sophomore year, I was creating these rough wooden, like burlap portraits, and they were really rough and jagged and kind of violent looking, and how they interacted with each other. And I think at college, I was trying to find, how do I express something that is both sublime and horrific, that is both healing, but recognizes the wound that is being healed at the same time. Because I think a lot of times in modern discourse, we tend to focus on one or the other, and not actually the process of healing and how that is both horrific, but also sublime. So for me, I think my fascination with this subject has come out of grief. I lost my mom when I was 19. I was in my gap year before I came to Gordon. And following her passing, I spent, I think, 4 months or so pretty much by myself in my family's apartment. My dad worked, so I would be there during the day and he'd come home at night. But that was a lot of time for me to be by myself in a space that I had once shared, with my whole family. And looking back at that time, I identify it as both a time that was, really dark in a lot of ways for obvious reasons, but also one of the most, richest and beautiful seasons of my life, which was really strange at the time. No one tells you that, grief can be beautiful. Grief is, ugly and hard and sad, and that's about it. But there's a deeper level of sacredness that I think is available in grief for those who are willing to, dig into it. So during my time of grief, that's when I also began to notice how grief kind of connects with tree imagery, which is, my thesis. And what I'm going to be talking about with my paintings is how grief and tree imagery kind of relates together. So it was around this time that I started noticing that in my grief, the way I perceived the world changed really drastically. I stopped seeing color. Not really, but I didn't feel it the same way. You know, when a color hits your eye, it feels a certain way. Lost that completely. And so overall, just the way I was perceiving the world shifted in a really weird way. And I started to fascinate on tree shadows in particular against buildings next to my house or on the sidewalks. And I would just stare at them for a long time. I realized after a while that I was identifying myself within the shadowed elements of the tree, so the branches and the twisting leaves and how it kind of is hazy and dark and fades. And I was identifying my mother in the abstracted shapes of gold that were, you know, glowing on the sidewalk that seemed, I don't know, they were separate from me, but I was the one in darkness and she was the one kind of in the light and glory. So there was that kind of started it. And then another thing was that I have in my possession one of my mom's plants. She had it when she was in college, actually. So it's a quite old plant. It's around like 30, 40 years old. And I brought that plant, you know, with me to college as I, you know, was still grieving at school, and it stayed in my dorm room just like it was in hers. And it was just this kind of weird connection to see, not like my mom. It's not like I look at the plant and it's, you know, Mother Willow or Grandmother Willow from Pocahontas, you know, it's not like that sort of connection. It was more like I was able to almost find memories in it or see memories stored in it, like a relic, you know, like a reliquary where memories would be stored and held. And I don't know, I just kind of meditated on that for a long time. And then when I got to Gordon and I began my studies, I came across more and more instances of, you know, grief that is related to tree imagery. And it just kept happening and happening. And eventually I needed to do like a formal study of this subject, just because it was something that was hitting a chord really deep in me that I didn't quite understand yet. And also because it was something that I was seeing reflected in the world around me that hinted at a continuing theme that I hadn't really heard discussed much. So that's how my whole thesis project came to be. It was my whole college career developing. In addition to the 12 paintings that I made, I have made a 60 plus page paper, which kind of delves into a lot of the ways that different cultural traditions or myths or music or art, even modern movies kind of display this theme. Once you start seeing it, it's everywhere. So I apologize if after this, you know, session, you guys are walking around and you're seeing it everywhere. I found it in an ad for an event at Gordon last spring. It was a discussion on the culture of suicide, and the background was, you know, tree leaves. And I was in the middle of painting and writing at that time, so I felt a little, you know, triggered finding it again around me. So with that, I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint. So this is obviously not my work. These are some instances from art history that I pulled on in my thesis to kind of illustrate how this theme of, you know, grief-related tree imagery has really permeated a lot of different cultures. So on the left is a image of Osiris from, you know, Egyptian culture. It is an image of, you know, Osiris as the god of the dead and the underworld. He is being watered by a priest, and out of his body is sprouting corn. This kind of flows out of tradition of the Nile being a life-giving, you know, if violent, source of life in Egypt. And on the right is, you know, Bernini's Apollo and Daphne, you know, the famous story of how Daphne turns into a tree. This next one is from contemporary American culture. Well, contemporary as in the Civil War, but more contemporary than ancient Egypt. It's an image shot shortly after the Battle of Gettysburg by Matthew Brady. And it's called Wounded Trees at Gettysburg. The power behind this image is that it really equates human death and suffering with the suffering of the trees around it. And to this day, if you go to Gettysburg, they mark the trees that were there at the battle. They call them witness trees. They call them, trees that kind of take the place of living veterans to testify to the horrors of that event. So some of them have, cannonballs, or bullets embedded in their wood. So there's been a deep tradition of this happening. When it came to kind of figuring out how what I was going to do with this tradition I was finding in all these different sources and all these different cultures, it was kind of interesting to try to take that and use my own experience to sort of create a new iteration of that theme, I guess, in 2020. I looked back a lot on memories. I pulled a lot from memories, whether photographed or not, landscaped images, abstract things, and portraits. So my 12 paintings, actually, there's 3 each, and each of those categories: abstract, portrait, landscape, and memory. Those are categories I saw after I had made them, not that were intentional, so I'm still trying to remember them. So this is one of the first ones that really came to completion. I was working on a lot of them simultaneously. This one kind of finished first. It is more of an abstract painting I did of a tree bark image I took on my phone while a few months after my mom passed away. There's something about that image that always kind of echoed back to that time for me. So I really kind of delved into it. I think the next image is this is a close-up of some of the texture in that piece. So the process I developed to create my paintings was just as much of a process as kind of the intellectual sorting through grief and the experiences of it and why it was hard, but also beautiful in that paradox. It was a long, kind of drawn out process to figure out how to actually get the feelings I want to be imbued onto my surfaces for these paintings. It involved a lot of layers of acrylic paint, which I would paint on and then sand off or scrape off. Sometimes I used a nail, literally, and kind of scrape them off. But then also on top of the many layers of acrylic, on most of the pieces, I did a very gentle layer of nihonga, which is a Japanese traditional form of painting which uses minerals as a pigment. The minerals are semi-precious stones such as malachite or azurite, and they are ground up to different levels of fineness, suspended in a animal hide glue, and then applied over the surface. This is kind of a really untraditional use for this medium. I was taught last summer in the technique by Mako Fujimura. It was a real blessing to be able to learn from him. So you can see in this piece, there's kind of a light green blue, powder that kind of is skimmed across the surface. That's the nihonga. It reflects light in a different way, so it adds a really unique touch to it. This is another piece which was based on a old photograph I had, very kind of faded and blasted out. Again, the use of, I sanded a lot in this one. I think the next one, yep, I always forget which ones I had the detailed photos for. I painted all these pieces on birch panels. So as I was sanding away, I was actually getting back to the wood grain itself, which was now stained and sometimes still embedded with paint in some places. That was just another additional layer for me in trying to find the connection between, trees and grief in my own life. In this one, I used another layer of nihonga over top of it. I was really hesitant to actually apply it because I liked the piece the way it was, but I went for it. And it's been really cool talking to some of my friends who have seen it in person because it has added a lot of depth in ways that I wasn't expecting. The next piece is a portrait / memory. I'm not really sure what category it fits in. It's of my grandmother, a photo that my my mom, took of her. Here you can see the Nihonga more close up. It's that kind of misty, sparkly substance kind of spread across the surface. I think next I actually have a video. Oof, will it play? So you can see it kind of sparkle a bit, how it catches the light. The thing about Nihonga actually that Mako taught me was that it doesn't just reflect light, it captures light within the surface and reflects it around inside, or refracts it around, which for me very much kind of echoed the feeling of grief in a lot of ways, because it's beautiful, but it's also broken and fragmented and kind of pulverized. You feel pulverized and destroyed, but at the same time, there's beauty there in those fragments. This one is another photo, actually from the same series of photos from the portrait of my grandmother above that my mom took. I think she took these in West Bridgewater, Massachusetts in the 70s. That's my best guess. But I used some Nihonga in this one as well, but also very much utilized kind of dripping the paint more, dripping the paint over the surface, allowing it to just kind of flow. This one is the most kind of explicit portrait in the whole series. I wasn't sure for a while if it was going to work with the rest of the pieces. It is not finished yet. You can see it on the easel behind me. Will it be finished by the time I have to turn in my paintings? I don't know, but I think the stage of process that it's in shows an integrity that is still worth kind of displaying. This is a portrait of my mom. I took the reference photo a few months before she passed away. And as I was looking back through my photos of her, this one struck me not just because of her, leaning against a tree, but the whole kind of gesture and emotion of it seemed to capture, I don't know, a feeling, a sense. Grief is kind of an indescribable type of beauty. Yeah. Even after writing 60 plus pages on it, I still have trouble articulating it sometimes. One of the techniques I utilized a lot, as I've already said, is sanding. And I really kind of discovered how it can add that sort of rough, harsh beauty to things, revealing different layers, having it not be a perfect painting, but being the right painting, being the right sort of feeling. This one is also unfinished. It is the latest one. I've made it in the last several weeks. I had 11 paintings and I decided I want to make it around dozen. Also, I was able to go back to one of my main inspirations for this whole project, which was maple leaves and how the type of colors that they turn in the fall. Again, an image of a death, but a really beautiful one, and one that is not insignificant, that people celebrate each year, actually. This one I've used a lot, a fair amount of Nihonga on and a fair amount of sanding. We'll see how it turns out. This was the cover picture for this event. And this one, I guess I'll just say something that I was trying to access here. This is taken from an inside of a window, actually looking out. And the thing that caught my eye about the scene was how the light was hitting the branches further away, but not the ones close up. So the leaves that are the largest are actually the darkest. There's a lot of dark things close up to you. The branches are very dark, but as you get further and further away, they lighten up, and it was amazing. The view, it actually lightened up into a very electric green, which you don't think exists in nature, but if you look hard enough, you'll find it. This is another memory. There's no Nihongo on this one, actually. I thought it might need it, but it didn't. This is one that I think proves the frustration of trying to photograph artwork. You really got to see it in person. So if we ever get if you're ever able to, even see it in the gallery, I think what I was trying to get with this one was a presence of a person in a landscape, kind of behind this substance or this veil, this separation. You can sense the presence, but you can't quite access it. It's that paradox between recognition and an ability to fully recognize or fully interact. This one, I think, is a landscape-based one, also on an old photograph. Blurry forsythia bushes. There's something bittersweet about the photo, about kind of how bleached out the branches were, but how vibrant the flowers were. And that is all. I didn't think I'd get through them all. I can go back through if anyone wants to go through them, see any more of them. I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan for our next section of this event.
Yeah. First off, thank you so much. I think that was a fantastic presentation. Great job. I hope that we're able to see it either in the gallery at some point or at another gallery, not at Gordon at some point. I just think it's really great work. So for the rest of the session, we're just going to open it up to have a Q&A here. So if you have any questions in the audience, feel free to either throw it in the chat or just throw a hand up and we'll be sure to get to you. We're going to try to wrap up the session around 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock is when we're going to stop the official recording and the official session. But Meredith is going to stick around for a few minutes after. So if you want to just sort of have some more informal discussions or have more questions or want to go through and look at some of the slides, again, we'll stick around a little bit after the official session for that, but we'll definitely have a window right at 7 if people need to log off. Feel free to do that. You won't hurt our feelings at all. So we'll open it up now for a Q&A. I'll start us off. I just had a question, Meredith. I'm just wondering, because I'm not an artist at all when it comes to painting or anything, I'm just wondering how long it sort of takes you to do one piece, how long you'll typically work on one piece, or if it's different for each piece, and just sort of when you know when a painting is finished and when you know when like a whole set of paintings is finished, if you just sort of know from painting for so long, or if there's some technique to it, or I'm just really curious about that.
Yeah. So some of these pieces, I should say I started all these pieces back in January, or later. Some of them, like the one of the forsythia bushes, I've been working on. That was one of the first ones I started, and it's one of the last ones I finished. Whereas other paintings, like the first one I showed, the abstract green one, that was one of the first ones I started, and it was finished really, really quickly on. How I know if they're finished varies. I think it's my goal to sort of get to the point that I can identify a presence within the painting. It kind of becomes I don't want to say a living object because it's not living, but it takes on its own presence in a room. And it also becomes something that it takes on a presence in a room in relation to me that's different than just something I'm working on or a project, or like, this is my creation. It takes on a life that is separate from me in a way that I can't explain. And sometimes you push it too far and you kind of make it, it loses that life, and sometimes you don't push it far enough, and that it's always a battle to try to get it to just that point where it takes on enough presence to kind of exist on its own. I'm still learning how to do that. So yeah. And then was there another question? That was a series of questions.
Oh, just when you know when like the whole collection is done, when you're working on, say, a whole thesis exhibit
Got
like
you.
this.
Yeah, well, I've been working on this for I think an extra 3 or 4 months than I was originally expecting, and I still don't quite feel done with it or some of the pieces. I think it's very much like when in everyone's life when you kind of feel like an interest has faded, or maybe for a while you're super into like astronomy and you're like researching all about that and studying it, and then you kind of move on to something else. This is just kind of like it's a deeper interest because it's related more to like my vocation, but it is kind of like that where it's like I am really interested in how these things relate. And so the series isn't quite finished. It's all I can make for the show. I expect my work to kind of continue along this theme, if not explicitly, but in reference for many years to come. But it may kind of shift in scope and in kind of subject a little bit.
That's great. Thank you. Now we'll open up to any other questions from our virtual audience.
Ryan, I'm
Yeah.
John Gillen. May I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. You know, I know a bit and am amazed that the one strength of your entire project here was bringing together very serious scholarly research of the relation of the long, in fact, throughout human history, the relation of trees to grief imagery. So you did that. You also studied deeply, as your slideshow showed, artworks that operate in that tradition. So my question is, and then of course you've done your own body of work, is that there is a difference between doing a body of work, you know, painting those leaves, maybe it was a rhododendron, or, you know, outside the window, and having some knowledge that you were working in a very long tradition. There's a difference though between that and actually being a part of that tradition as in a way that the other iterations, both in poetry, photography, painting, through, you know, 3 millennia, it's another thing to really be influenced by that. So actually, that's my question. In a certain way, and of course, this is no criticism, when you were speaking about your own work, you could have said all those things without any reference to the other parts of your project. You didn't refer to other things. So I'm wondering, was your own work really in a separate category, maybe its own container, and you were enriched intellectually by your study, or was there anything deeper that came out of, that connected your work with the tradition that you have now deeply studied? Is that a clear enough question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so it's true that I didn't necessarily pull distinctly on direct themes from the sources I studied. I didn't copy any, I didn't like do a depiction of Daphne or other sources I found. I did consider it. I considered kind of doing a portrait of my mom metamorphosized into a tree, but it all just kind of ended up feeling very forced. And that's where I kind of had to fall back on the fact that while I was doing this as a scholar, I was also doing this as an artist. And because of that, I couldn't kind of force it to fit into that certain mold. My advisors for both of Bruce, my advisor for my thesis project, very much encouraged me as I was, you know, studying and all these things to let it inform it, but I still had to let the pieces kind of create to become what they needed to be. Which is, while it is not in the distinct tradition of how these images have, you know, portrayed themselves, it is within the tradition in the way that I kind of encountered it, that these images of trees related to grief take on a life of their own, and they can't really be contained to one form of expression. They are continually evolving and forming new expressions in light of the culture they're in, or the community they're in, or the particular situation they're related to. It's a really flexible image, and it doesn't just fit into one distinct category, but it branches out, into many different types of images. So while I may not have pulled from, distinct images, I feel like my pieces fit within this theme. At the same time, they're not explicit to the theme, and they can exist apart from my whole study. And I'm okay with that. Like I said, this is very much an ongoing process. And there are ways that I think as I keep creating in this theme, I will get, closer to how do I do a picture of that's related to my own personal grief and also references the traditions in a deeper way. I think for this first batch, this first series, I needed to make them more personal than related to the tradition. And I think as I keep going, I might be able to echo back more to the tradition and bring in more, stories and compositions that were used there.
I have a question, Meredith. I guess it's kind of an observation maybe and leading to a question. And first, let me just say thank you for sharing your work. It's lovely and very moving. And thank you for sharing your personal story as well. That context, I think, makes a difference as I see your work. And I guess I'm just connecting something that you said at the beginning in terms of, I think it was that period of time in the apartment, and you commented about the sacredness of grief and the beauty that you found in that, if you're willing to enter into that. And then I guess I was connecting that with that technique that you said you learned last summer, and you were talking about the light that's refracted in terms of beauty that you are finding in the artwork. I guess I was just thinking about those two things, and then our theme, and I'm just wondering if you would just reflect a bit in terms of maybe the role of the artist in a time of crisis. Would there be something about the role of the artist, or maybe it's the Christian artist, in having the eyes to see beauty during times of pain or lament or grief? Is that something that you would say is part of the vocation of the artist, or the vocation of the Christian artist? Even Christ, I guess I'm thinking of the admonition, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Is it similar with the artist then? Is it, she who has eyes to see, let her see? I guess I'm struck by your ability to see that beauty in the grief. Is that, do you think, not just your ability to do that, but do you think that's a charge for all Christian artists to be able to do that in a time of grief or crisis?
Yeah. I don't know if I go so far to say it's a charge for all Christian artists. I think for me, it has definitely stemmed out of my faith inherently. The season when I was in my kind of apartment by myself, I formed a very deep connection to the image of Christ crucified, which I hadn't necessarily had before. Christ crucified and also risen. Kind of the grotesqueness of his death with the purity and beauty of his rising, and I very much identified with that with my own mother's death, and her now being with in glory, and me now being here suffering without her at that time. So for me, from that point, I think it is part of my calling, at least as a Christian artist, to call our neighbors, to call our country to lament, and to focus in that being okay. It's kind of become more of a buzzword lately since the pandemic has happened, which has been really fun to see, because it's been something that's been really deep in my heart for several years. Lamentations is, I think, one of the most powerful books in the Bible, and I think before this year, I think several Christians would have been kind of shocked with the type of language that's used in that book, with how people, address God and talk to God about the struggles they're going through. But I think it also, in the book of Lamentation, accesses that type of beauty. And it's not just that sort of trite hope that a lot of people associate with the Book of Lamentations, like his mercies are new every morning and everything will be okay. It's a hope that comes out of a really deep place of destruction and out of loss, a hope that refuses to let go to, you know, the gospel and to the hope of Christ's sacrifice, even in the midst of utter destruction. During that time, I also identified a lot with a painting by Manet. It's called Dead Christ with Angels. And it's very much just a picture of Christ, you know, sitting there. You don't often see portraits of Christ necessarily like in the tomb. You mostly see him risen or crucified. So, yeah, I don't know. Did that quite answer your question? I think I got on a bit of a tangent.
No, that was great. Thank you.
I have a question. Well, a comment and a question. Well, first of all, Meredith, I've known you for quite a while. Kind of known you more in the early days of your art in college, sharing a studio with you, and you know, I've just kind of kept up with you through social media since then. And it's just been really cool to watch you sort of develop from those beginnings that I could see. You know, I saw your original drawings, and then I was working with you in the sculpture studio, and now you're painting. And I've just always really admired your ability to move so fluidly back and forth between disciplines. And I wonder, you know, as you're talking about these ideas projecting forth in your work, and you know, this thesis kind of being just a starting point for more work coming ahead. And so I guess my question for you is, as you look ahead, can you see yourself, you know, staying with painting? Do you see yourself moving back in a more sculptural direction? Do you see yourself working with both, or do you not know yet? You want to see where the wind takes you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the past 6 months, I've also been working on a wood carving while doing all these paintings on wood. And it's been kind of interesting to, you know, go from writing about trees to painting on trees to carving trees. It's been a lot of trees. So yeah, I've still been kind of flip-flopping, and I haven't quite figured out what the significance of that is, that I've been, you know, carving wood this whole time. I think ideally, or not ideally, but I can definitely see myself transitioning to more of an installation sculpture type path that sort of blends a lot of the mediums I've used. Emphasis on, you know, the layers and different textures, and the way light plays into things has kind of been consistent across a lot of the disciplines I've done with sculpture and with painting. That's been consistent. Very much trying to get at something that's interior, trying to get at something that is hard to name has been something consistent. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think it will develop in whatever ways it needs to for me to continue pursuing these themes. That's been the consistent thing throughout my kind of art journey, rather than the medium. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Feel free to throw a question in the chat too. If you don't want to be on camera, I can always read questions off. Oh yeah, go for it.
Hey Meredith, it's Angus. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's nice to see your presentation. It's nice to see how you've come together over the trees. And I'm glad to have one of your trees here in my house. It's a wonderful thing. My question isn't so much a question as a prompt, because I'm a teacher. It's my nature to prompt people. And that is to say that I sent you a contact on Instagram just now, and she is working in glass in much the way you were talking about the application of the Japanese blue application. I'm drawing a blank on what its name is.
Yeah, Nihanga. It's cool. It's a hard word.
Nihanga, thank you.
Yeah.
But my push is to say that you might be interested in trying to do some of the work that you're doing in fused glass, because it does allow for that depth of texture that you're loving with your sanding and your pulling back and painting over and layering of things. And it adds a layer of transparency and uh, the word you used, not reflection, but refraction.
Refraction, yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it might be worth checking into that. And I'm really proud of you. Congratulations, and keep going. And I don't really have any direct questions for you, but keep working.
Thank you. I also take advice and suggestions and all types of comments in addition to questions. So literally anything. Thank you, Angus.
You're welcome.
Hi, Meredith. I just first want to say I'm so proud of you and I love you so much. It's been an honor to see you on this journey these past few months there, even though it looked very different than you expected. But talking about looking different than you expected, I'm going to be that person and ask the COVID question. How has the world events changed your process of making your artwork? Whether, I know there was at first the questions of like, would you be able to work in the studio when this first happened? I know you moving your materials to another location, like how's that physically, how did the pandemic physically impact the process of your artwork, or has even the events maybe even changed some of the direction and some of the art of the pieces that you were working, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, physically, it's changed it a lot in the fact that I have created these paintings in 3 different locations. And the first location was at Gordon in my lovely, nice room studio. Following that, I was in a corner of a laundry room with good lighting, so it worked. It was good. And now I'm at my new apartment. So I think just having to transition in so many different locations has been kind of an obstacle, getting settled and figuring it out, but it's also helped me really kind of figure out what is primary to my painting process. So that's kind of been a benefit. I now know what are my essential colors, what are my essential equipment. So I'm getting some feedback. Sorry about that, guys. So I also, when it comes to dealing with how it might have changed my work itself, I don't think it's changed it in substance too much. I think if anything, it's encouraged me a lot, because with the pandemic, I was suddenly seeing lots of people post on Facebook about lament and how important that is and how we are all in a season of lament. And I suddenly, felt like I wasn't just the only one over here trying to, not the only one, but one of the few people really trying to dig into this subject. But I felt like it was suddenly becoming a subject that was very applicable in a lot of ways. And I became really kind of excited to see how my work could speak into the current situation in a way that could bring healing and bring hope, for the sake of finding beauty in trauma, and finding beauty in grief, and finding beauty in loss of experience of family members, of our ideas for the future.
Great. Any other questions? I have another just sort of general question. Meredith, I'm wondering if you just have any sort of general advice, maybe either to incoming students who might be thinking about majoring in art, or maybe rising seniors who are going to start working on thesis projects pretty soon, just if you have any general advice for navigating the art major at Gordon.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot going on for art majors right now. I think some of the best advice I have is to stay in your sketchbook a lot. That's not something I was ever really good at, but whenever I did, I always thrived. Stay connected with how you are feeling and processing things. I said at the beginning that a lot of the importance of, this project has not just been to create the art, but to figure out how to be an artist, not just as a scholar, not just as a person who makes things, but as I just exist and move through the world. How do I how to process, grief and trauma as an artist. There's a lot of grief and trauma right now, so I think artists in particular need to be sensitive to how they are processing that. But in addition to that, I think artists are some of the most well-equipped people to speak into our communities right now. We are people who are, we kind of sit on the outside looking in a lot of the time. We observe situations and people and trends and things, and we find a way to communicate them in a way that's separate and different than a lot of different medias. They can reach past a lot of the divisions that are separating people from being in community right now. Mako Fujimura likes to call artists border stalkers, and I kind of borrow that phrase a lot as people who walk the tender line between divided people and try to bring them to unity. So I think that is the calling that someone going into art right now can have, and I think it's a really noble calling. How to go about doing that is very difficult, and I'm still trying to figure that out. But I think staying in your sketchbook, staying active on campus, but also not being afraid to be a hermit in your studio, because it takes both. And remembering to let yourself have the time and space you need to process events as an artist, as someone who is, observing things as a border stalker and trying to figure out how to reconcile sides together.
Great, thank you. All right, any final questions for Meredith? If not, that's totally fine. Yeah, Meredith, just any final words you'd like to leave us with, and then we can end the video Q&A portion of this, and then yeah, we'll just stick around. Meredith will be around a little bit after if anyone wants to ask any more questions or just have a bit more of casual conversation or look back at any of the slides. You can definitely do that. But yeah, Meredith, any final words to leave us with?
Just that over the next few weeks, I'll be posting a new painting on my Instagram and website every other day. So you can keep up with it there. All the paintings are for sale unless otherwise listed. So if you're interested, feel free to shoot me a message to inquire. If you're interested in this kind of theme or subject, I'd be happy to send you my, 60-page thesis paper if you're at all interested in going into like individual sources or different stories. So that's, just let me know about that. And yeah, thank you so much for coming and for your encouragement and questions. Yeah.
Great. It looks like we got one last minute question here. Meredith, is there a medium that you have not yet experimented with that you'd like to explore?
Oof, I've never done clay, really, like ceramic. And that's something I was going to do at Gordon, but then the schedule got shifted and I never got a chance to explore it. So I think, or glass, that'd be something too I'd want to get into. Yeah.
Great. Well, Meredith, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This whole thing's been recorded, so if anybody of any friends who couldn't make it tonight, feel free to send this recording to them. It should be on our website sometime next week. And just a reminder that our final Digital Fine Arts Festival session of the summer will be next week, same day at 5 o'clock, and that's a theater education workshop with Kayla Dixon. But thank you all so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you real soon.
Thanks, Meredith.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.